Good morning, Doc. Pwede na po mag-start, Doc.
Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
So for today, good morning, everyone. We are section 8N, group 8N. This is for neurology 2 cerebrovascular diseases case. Next slide, please. So for the identifying data of our patient, we have GN, a 56-year-old male. He is a right-handed, known hypertensive, and also came to the emergency room for the consult. Next slide, please. Uh, the chief complaint of the patient is doubling of vision and difficulty in moving the left eye when he came for the emergency room consult.
The history of present illness, the patient presented to the emergency room with a chief complaint of double vision and difficulty of moving his eye to the left. He noticed these symptoms suddenly 3 days ago and sought medical attention due to their persistence. However, there are no other associated symptoms such as headache, nausea, dizziness, vomiting, or loss of balance. Also, there is no apparent motor weakness or numbness on any part of the body.
So for the past medical history, the patient had a history of hypertension for which he takes a daily dose of enalapril, 5 milligrams per tab. He is otherwise in good health and has no history of diabetes or other significant medical conditions. He denies any recent trauma, infections, or changes in medication. He has no history of any previous hospitalizations or major surgeries. He has no known food or drug allergy. For family history, there is no significant family history of neurological disorders or eye conditions. Next slide, please. Next slide. And then for social history, the patient is a non-smoker and consumes alcohol only occasionally. He denies any history of illicit drug use. He is a right-handed and a college graduate. He leads a sedentary lifestyle due to the nature of his desk job as an accountant. Next slide.
Okay, so for the review of systems for the skin, the patient denies experiencing pruritus, jaundice, rashes, and hair or nail changes. For HENT, he denies of experiencing nasooral discharge, epistaxis, tinnitus, ear pain, dysphagia, hoarseness of voice. For respiratory, he denies experiencing cough, dyspnea, sputum production, hemoptysis, pleuritic chest pain, and PTB exposure. For cardiovascular, he denies paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea, orthopnea, chest pain, palpitations, and easy fatigability. Next slide, please. For the gastrointestinal, he also denies of epigastric pain, nausea, vomiting, constipation, diarrhea, melena or hematochezia, significant weight loss, and decreasing appetite. For genitourinary, he denies retention, issues in retention, frequency, urgency, nocturia, intermittency, dribbling, and has a normal stream. For musculoskeletal, he denies back pain, recent trauma. And for CNS, he denies having headache, dizziness, tremors, and seizures. Next slide, please. So upon physical examination, the patient's vitals are BP of 150/90. So this is an indication of hypertension, which was mentioned in the identifying data. For the heart rate, 88 BPM. For the respiratory rate, 20 CPM. Temperature of 36.6 degrees Celsius. O2 saturation of 98% at room air. And BMI of 28. So according to the Asia Pacific classification, the BMI of 28 can be categorized as a obese class 1. For HENT, anecteric sclerae, pale, pink palpebral conjunctivae, dry lips and oral mucosa, no tonsillopharyngeal congestion, non-distended neck veins, no cervical lymphadenopathies. For pulmonary, equal chest expansion, no retractions, and clear breath sounds. For CVS, adynamic precordium, normal rate and regular rhythm, distinct S1 and S2, no murmurs. PMI was displaced in the fourth ICS. So this can also be explained because of the hypertension of the patient. So possibly the patient's heart might be enlarged. So midclavicular line, no carotid bruit. For the abdomen, no visible lesions, no tenderness, normoactive bowel sounds on all four quadrants. For extremities, moist skin, no skin lesions, full equal peripheral pulses, and no edema. So next slide. Upon neurologic exam, for the mental status exam, the patient is awake with good regard, hair is well kept, and is dressed appropriately according to age. He has a euthymic mood with appropriate affect. For the frontal lobe, good insight, judgment, and fund of knowledge with good concentration and attention. For the temporal, patient was oriented to time, place, and person, intact, immediate, recent, and remote memory. For parietal, no right to left disorientation, no acalcula, no agraphia, no finger agnosia, no neglect, no body part agnosia, no constructional, ideomotor, and dressing apraxia. For occipital, patient was able to identify colors, objects, and familiar faces. For the cranial nerve exams, for the cranial nerve 1, the patient was able to identify test substance such as coffee in both nostrils. For cranial nerve 2, no visual field cuts were observed. Fundoscopy had a red-orange reflex with sharp dismargins and cup disc ratio of 1:3. AV ratio was 2:3 and no exudates or hemorrhages were observed in both eyes. For cranial nerve 2 and 3, pupils were 3 millimeters, briskly reactive to light on both sides, and intact and had intact direct and contextual references. For cranial nerve 3, 4, and 6, is a pertinent finding since the patient presented with a limited horizontal movement of both eyes, which was more pronounced on the left side rather than the right side. Convergence was intact, normal vertical eye movements were observed. For cranial nerve 5, intact V1 to V3 with good temporalis and masseter tone. For cranial nerve 7, no facial asymmetry was observed. For cranial nerve 8, intact Ross hearing, Weber test at midline, and Ryan test with air conduction greater than bone conduction. For cranial nerve 9 and 10, intact gag and equal palatal rise with uvula at the midline. For cranial nerve 11, good sternocleidomastoid tone bilaterally, and for cranial nerve 12, tongue midline, no atrophy or fasciculations. Additionally, for the motor and sensory, the patient had good muscle, bulk, and tone with no spasticity. For his motor strength, spontaneous movements of all extremities with no preferential movements or laterality noted with 5 out of 5 on all extremities. On sensory, 100% intact and equal to pain, temperature, and crude touch. Had intact vibratory and position sense of both lower extremities. So for the muscle stretch reflexes, all reflexes had normal findings. For cerebellar, there was presence of nystagmus on the lateral gaze to the left, but no dysmetria on finger to nose test and on heel to chin test. No dysdiadochonesia was also observed. As for pathologic reflexes, no ankylosing, no Hoffman signs, but left Babinski sign was observed. For meninges, no nickel rigidity, Brzezinski sign, and Koenig sign was observed.
Okay, before we go into your primary impression, balik muna tayo sa history ng patient. History slide. And so, your patient is 56 years old, tama? Yung handedness, binigay ba? Right-handed, left-handed?
Right-handed po, Doc.
Right-handed, okay. So, your patient comes in with doubling of vision. So, what do you call this? In medical terms, anong doubling of vision?
Diplopia po.
Diplopia. Tapos, in the Filipino language, ano ang doubling of vision?
Duling po.
Duling, okay, sige. Kasi nako-confuse ma- maraming mga students, lalo na pag nag-clerkship, nako-confuse sila sa blurring of vision and doubling of vision. No? So when you say diplopia, doubling of vision, that's anong ano yung in-examine natin? The integrity of the muscles, EOMs, tama? And then when you have blurring of vision, anong chine-check naman natin? We're checking for which cranial nerve or which pathway, the visual pathway, no? Both yung anterior na mga corneal, retina, ganyan. Tapos even yung more posterior pathway, intracranially, yung visual pathway from the optic nerve to your optic radiations to the occipital cortex, no? So when it's vision, blurring or mga missing portion of your vision, then the visual pathway yung titignan nyo. No? But when it's diplopia na binigay, then it's the EOMs na i-examine ninyo. So you have difficulty moving his eyes to the left. Okay. Symptoms niya started 3 days ago. No? So if you were considering a vascular event for this patient, history of present illness pa lang, parang pag ito dumating sa ER, yung urgency nyo on a scale of 1 to 10, gano'n ka-urgent? I'm talking about the golden period of stroke.
For me, Doc, 8/10 po with high urgency.
Okay, sige. 10/, high urgency siya. Well, very urgent siya kasi stroke siya. But in terms of the stroke window, it's already three days ago na eh. So, kumbaga, itatriage mo na siya sa utak mo pag nakita mo tong patient sa ER. It is urgent, but at least you know that is the patient a candidate for thrombolysis? History of present illness pa lang?
Most probably hindi na po, Doc.
Who spoke? Kainglet?
Yes po, Doc. Parang di na po siya viable ng thrombolysis if ever since beyond the window na siya since beyond 3 days na yun ng patient natin.
Okay, kasi ang golden period ng stroke natin is within 3 to 4.5 hours, di ba? From symptom onset. So, ito yung, usually pag mga vascular cases, history pa lang, ang pinaka-important na kukunin mo is when did it happen. So, in the clinical world, ang tawag natin doon ay ictus, no? Have you heard of that term? Ictus? So, ictus is the onset, no? So, kapag tinanong kayo, eventually, when you rotate, o anong ictus ng patient or last seen well? Kasi some patients, hindi nila masasabi sa inyo mga 12 o'clock, nag-start yung symptoms ko. So, may mga patients na lying on the floor unconscious, so they cannot tell you when the symptoms started. So kung walang defined ictus, you just ask the relatives or the bystanders when was the ano yung time that the patient was last seen well. So yun, very important ang timing sa history of your present illness because it will dictate what type of management you will give to this patient. So tama si Ernel, so 3 days ago pa to, so this patient will not be eligible for thrombolysis. So at best, if you're already considering a vascular case in this patient, secondary stroke prevention na tayo. Okay? Be honest, sino yung na, nanood ng yung lecture or nakinig dun sa lecture na binigay on stroke? May nagbasa naman or may nakinig? Were you given that one? Oo. Ayan, sige. May nag-raise ng hand. Thank you. And so, di ba, yun yung, ano natin, you have the acute management, the hyperacute management, which is the IV thrombolysis, and then you have the secondary stroke prevention, no? So, when you have a vascular case, dinadissect mo na siya history of present illness pa lang. So, for this patient, you don't have any headache, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, loss of balance. So, why are these symptoms being given to you? Or in your case, when you rotate in your ER rotations. No, I'm telling you this kasi lahat kayo magro-rotate ha. mag-aabot tayo ng clerkship lahat. So ito, this is already giving you an idea of what type, if this is a vascular case, what type of stroke most likely. History of present illness pa lang. Diba there are two types, ischemic and hemorrhagic? Yes. So can anyone tell me what type of stroke are you considering in this patient based on your HPI?
Ischemic po, Doc.
Ischemic, good. Because in hemorrhagic stroke, usually, again, I mentioned it in the lecture, pag hemorrhagic, ano yung three signs? Or two signs na nakikita niyo sa patients, lalo na pag super taas ng blood pressure, may increased ICP. It's the headache and vomiting. Okay? So yun, kaya binigay ito to give you an idea, and also the symptom progression. Wala kang additional symptoms na nag-develop throughout yung 3 days na yan. Okay? Because if this is a case of a hemorrhagic stroke, so you have a bleed na hindi nakakontrol for 3 days, so that's still expanding. What do you expect? Should you have more symptoms, or it will just stay the same?
More symptoms po, Doc.
So more symptoms because an expanding hematoma should have some evidence of progression. Okay, so HPI pa lang, meron na tayong idea. Okay, sige, next slide. Punta tayo sa past medical history. Okay, so when we get past medical history, ito like hypertension. Ito kasi case na lang yung binigay sa inyo, di ba? But when you extract your data, what do you want to ask pa regarding the hypertension? What other data do you want to elicit? Doc, hypertensive po ako, mataas po yung blood pressure ko, naka-enalapril po ako. So, ano pa yung tatanong niyo sa patients?
Doc, yung highest recorded BP and the usual BP po.
Yes, good. So, usual BP and highest recorded BP. And also, additional information, very important, how long has he been hypertensive? So, yung duration. Okay. Anong name? Si Kabakungan? Were you the one who said that? Okay,
Yes.
so, anong first name mo?
Grace po.
Grace. So si Grace said that it's the usual BP and highest BP. So very important yan because I think it's tawag dito. Someone presented kanina sa physical examination yung blood pressure upon admission ni patient. So you will correlate it. So sige, there is what we call acute reactive hypertension. Now, your patients, both ischemic and hemorrhagic stroke, will present with elevated blood pressure. Okay. Can anyone tell me bakit in ischemic stroke magkakaroon ng elevated blood pressure? Aside from the usual or obvious answer that most patients are already hypertensive, that's why they had a stroke. Any guess?
Doc, siguro parang compensatory mechanism siya ng brain para i-increase yung perfusion sa mismong site yung site ng blockage, parang ganun po.
Yes, good. So it's a way to perfuse the brain, increase your cerebral blood flow perfusion. Kasi 'di ba we have what you call autoregulatory mechanism. Tama? Oo. So sa autoregulatory mechanism natin, initially your brain should be normally your brain should be able to compensate kung bababa ang blood pressure. Depending on your systemic blood pressure, kahit tumaas ba yan or bumaba pa yan, dapat nare-regulate ng brain mo yung blood flow into the brain. Dapat constant yan. In cases of stroke, impaired yung autoregulation na yan, which is why yung systemic blood pressure natin compensates, it increases. So both patients will come into you hypertensive, most in most cases, hypertensive, either ischemic or hemorrhagic. But what differentiates the two? Ito wala to sa Adams. But it was mentioned in Adams, but it wasn't elaborated. So for hemorrhagic stroke, we have what you call an acute reactive hypertension. No, so an acute reactive hypertension is usually a type of hypertension that is beyond et etong values na sasabihin ko, it's not in the book, but clinical practice, usually it's beyond 20 to 30 millimeter mercury from the usual and highest blood pressure recorded of the patient. Okay? So for example, yung patient mo hypertensive, 130 to 140 po ang usual na blood pressure niya. Tapos, dumating sa ER, di ba ang blood pressure ng patient niya dito, 150/90? So 150/90, hindi siya ganun, mataas siya, pero hindi siya ganun kalayo from your patient's baseline. No? So, when you have something like that, think baka ischemic. But you have a patient na ang usual blood pressure niya nasa 150 to 170, and then ang blood pressure mo upon arriving at the ER is 200 to 220 na systolic. Then that's a big discrepancy between the highest blood pressure and your baseline ER blood pressure. So kung 170, di ba, nasa 50, that's already an acute reactive hypertension leaning towards a hypertensive, leaning towards a hemorrhagic stroke more than an ischemic stroke. So, naintindihan yung portion na yun? Yes? Okay, sige. So, this is, same is true with, with diabetes. So, for all your comorbidities, you always have to ask hypertension, their usual control, and the duration of illness. Okay? Kasi even if controlled sila kung sobrang long-standing na ang comorbidities nila, it will still also have the same effect. Okay, sige. You can proceed. For the physical examination, sino yung nag-present, neurologic examination, sino nag-present kanina? Can you just tell us ano yung pinaka-pertinent na neurologic deficit mo?
Doc, it's the limited horizontal movement po of the both eyes. Then the next slide lang po. As well po as the nystagmus present on lateral gaze to the left and the left Babinski spine po.
Okay, sige. So, yung sinabi mo na impairment of horizontal movement of both eyes, that's what you call a conjugate gaze palsy. No? This is different from a monocular palsy na tig-iisang mata lang. Okay, sige. Anong difference ulit pag tig-iisang mata versus a conjugate gaze palsy? Anong iisipin mong impaired?
Doc, weak po yung extraocular muscle ng other side. So, nahihila po siya. Kaya, one side.
If it's monocular.
Yeah po.
But if you have a conjugate gaze palsy, that's a higher control, no? Oo. Sige. You will talk about the neuroanatomic correlation.
Yes po, Doc. In the
Okay.
next parts po.
Okay, sige. Sige, let's go to your primary impression. Foveal syndrome, likely secondary to a pontine lesion. Okay.
So, hi Doc, good morning po. So, the explanation po for the primary impression is that the patient's presentation of sudden onset diplopia and limited horizontal gaze to the left localizes the lesion to the pons. Particularly, it can involve the abducens nucleus or the paramedian pontine reticular formation or the PPRF po. So, for the rule in and rule out, my partner and I, Jean, will further discuss po why we ruled in this primary impression po. Next slide, please.
So I'll be explaining why our patient's presentation is consistent with this primary impression based on the history and physical examination findings alone. So looking at the patient's background, he has a long-standing hypertension.
Hi, Jen. Sorry to cut you off. When you say Foveal syndrome, you are considering an infarct or stroke?
Yes po, Doc. Infarct po. Sorry.
Infarct. Okay. Sige, kasi when you say primary, kasi yung primary impression, the slide that you showed kanina, that's about localization. No? And then you have, when you say primary impression, the disease that's causing it. Kasi foveal syndrome can be caused by a lot na, by different disease mechanism. like a tumor in that lesion, in that area can also lead to a foveal syndrome, no? So just to clarify for your tawag dito mga classmates, so you're considering a stroke, tama, for your primary impression, an ischemic one.
Yes po, Doc. And we will further talk about po sa final diagnosis din po.
Okay, sige, go ahead.
So, looking at the patient's background, he has long-standing hypertension, is overweight, and leads a sedentary lifestyle. So, these are a strong vascular risk factor for small vessel ischemic stroke. So, the background history may suggest a vascular etiology, which is consistent with foveal syndrome. So, on physical examination, the patient had limited horizontal eye movement, particularly when looking to the left. So this localizes to the left abducens nucleus or cranial nerve 6, which controls the ipsilateral rectus muscles. So involvement of this nucleus results in inability to abduct the ipsilateral eye, causing horizontal diplopia. So this finding may suggest that the lesion is located at the dorsal medial pons, which is the region affected in foveal syndrome. Next, during left gaze, nystagmus is noted. So, what happens in foveal syndrome, a pontine lesion may involve, such as cranial nerve 6 nucleus, which again affects the lateral rectus, the MLF, which disrupts the coordination between cranial nerve 6 and cranial nerve 3. It may also affect the vestibular nuclei, which alters the balance and eye movement control. So when MLF or the vestibular nuclei are damaged, the eye receives unequal input for movement coordination. So the brain senses mismatched signals, leading to repetitive involuntary oscillations of the eye, hence the nystagmus. So in terms of clinical manifestation, the direction is usually horizontal nystagmus, and most noticeable when looking towards the lesion side or during attempted lateral gaze. So next slide, please.
So further rule out symptoms po, the patient presented with no ipsilateral facial weakness. So classic foveal syndrome often presents with facial paralysis on the same side as the lesion due to facial nucleus involvement. However, the absence of facial weakness suggests that the lesion may be partial or more dorsally localized, sparing the facial nerve fibers. So for the patient also did not present any contralateral hemiparesis. So the damage to the descending corticospinal fibers in the pons produces contralateral motor weakness or Babinski sign. The absence of limb weakness indicates that the corticospinal tract is largely spared, suggesting a smaller or more restricted lesion within the pontine tegmentum. And lastly, the patient presented with a positive left Babinski sign. Although unexpected for a unilateral pontine lesion, this may represent minimal corticospinal irritation or like bilateral tract involvement due to the lesion's proximity to midline fibers. It could also be a non-localizing reflex or minor pyramidal tract spillover effect po. So, next slide.
So for our differential diagnosis, next slide please. For first differential, we considered internuclear ophthalmoplegia or INO. We ruled it in because the patient experienced double vision or diplopia and difficulty with horizontal eye movements, specifically when moving his eyes to the left, which can be seen in INO due to impaired coordination between the eyes during gaze. However, upon further evaluation, we eventually ruled it out. The MRI and MRA findings revealed a lesion in the left paramedian pontine reticular formation. In INO, the lesion is located in the medial longitudinal fasciculus and not in the PPRF. In addition, the patient had difficulty or an impaired abduction of the left eye and impaired adduction of the right eye, indicating a horizontal gaze palsy rather than rather than an isolated adduction deficit, which is typical of INO. There was also a nystagmus noted on the left lateral gaze to the left, corresponding to the side of the impaired abduction. In true INO, nystagmus occurs in the contralateral abducting eye and not on the ipsilateral side. Therefore, the overall pattern of findings does not match INO, which usually presents with ipsilateral adduction weakness, contralateral abducting nystagmus, and preserved vertical and convergence movements. Next slide, please.
Our next differential would be isolated abducens palsy. We rule it in due to the patient presenting with double vision wherein the affected eye cannot abduct. There's difficulty in moving both eyes to the left, which suggests a weakness in the left lateral rectus, which CN6 innervates. The patient also does not present with facial weakness, limb deficits, or sensory loss, suggesting that the lesion may be limited to CN6. Abducens nerve palsy is also linked to those with vascular comorbidities, especially in older adults. However, we rule it out due to the MRI findings showing a small lesion in the left paramedian pontine reticular formation. So the lesion involves central pontine structures, not the peripheral abducens nerve, which explains the patient's horizontal conjugate palsy. If the patient has isolated CN6 palsy, then it would cause an ipsilateral eye abduction deficit, and the contralateral eye would still abduct, causing diplopia, but not complete conjugate gaze failure, which is in contrast to our patient. Next slide, please. Another differential would be myasthenia gravis, as it is a common cause of double vision due to autoantibodies impairing neuromuscular transmission at the extraocular muscles. The patient also does not present with sensory deficits and has normal pupillary responses based on the neurological examination, which resembles myasthenia gravis, which is purely motor. However, we rule it out due to the patient's symptoms being sudden in onset, which is unlike MG, which is more gradual. And there was also no fatigability, ptosis, or diurnal variations, which are common symptoms. And lastly, again, MRI shows a small lesion in the PPRF, so this isn't a neuromuscular junction disorder. Next slide, please.
So for the localization, let's talk about the pertinent findings. Next slide, please. Here, just to highlight what Jean and Fatima said, the first pertinent finding is the limited horizontal movement of both eyes, especially to the left. In this case, the structure involved is the paramedian pontine reticular formation, PPRF, and the abducens nucleus. In this case, the MRI showed that the infarct is in the left paramedian pons, which includes the left PPRF and the abducens nucleus. The PPRF sends signals to the abducens nucleus on the same side, which moves the lateral rectus muscle and also connects to the opposite oculomotor nucleus through the medial longitudinal fasciculus or MLF to move the other eye. So if the left PPRF is damaged, both eyes cannot look to the left. As a result, neither eye can move leftward, showing a horizontal conjugate palsy toward the side of the lesion. Moreover, when one eye fails to move properly, as in this case, the visual axis of the two eyes no longer meet at the same point. The brain receives two different images from each eye, which causes horizontal diplopia.
In addition, the next finding, the nystagmus on lateral gaze to the left, could indicate the involvement of the abducens nucleus and its connections to the horizontal neural integrator. So the abducens nucleus receives projections from neurons within the medial vestibular nucleus and the nucleus prepositus hypoglossi that serve as the horizontal neural integrators. So this is a neural network in the brainstem that is adjacent to the abducens nucleus, and it functions by integrating eye velocity signals to create a persistent eye position signal. Or in other words, it is responsible for holding or maintaining an eccentric gaze.
So in pontine lesions, gaze-evoked nystagmus is a possible finding, and an unstable neural integrator caused by disruptions in its connections with the abducens nucleus caused the eye to drift back from an eccentric position. And this drift is followed by corrective saccades known as the gaze-evoked nystagmus. And in lesions affecting the vicinity of the abducens nucleus, this may present with different patterns of horizontal nystagmus. So in particular, damage to the connections between the nucleus prepositus hypoglossi and the abducens nucleus has been implicated in ipsilesional gaze-evoked nystagmus, which could be the reason for the patient's nystagmus on the lateral gaze to the left.
Another finding would be the presence of a left Babinski sign, which indicates an upper motor neuron lesion involving the corticospinal tract, which is responsible for carrying voluntary motor signals from the cerebral cortex down to the spinal cord. Normally, this pathway also exerts inhibitory control over spinal reflex arcs, keeping primitive reflexes such as the Babinski response suppressed. The corticospinal tract fibers descending through the pons have not yet crossed; they only decussate in the caudal medulla. Therefore, a pontine lesion produces upper motor neuron signs on the contralateral side of the body. In this context, a left Babinski sign would classically suggest involvement of the right corticospinal tract fibers in the right paramedian pons. However, considering the other findings, specifically the horizontal gaze limitation, especially to the left and left gaze nystagmus, diplopia, the lesion likely involves both the corticospinal tract and the pontine reticular formation within the left paramedian pons, where motor fibers and ocular motor nuclei lie in close proximity. This finding strengthens the localization to the left paramedian pons. Given this, the presence of a left Babinski sign may reflect early or subtle involvement of descending corticospinal fibers, or the initial Babinski examination may have been inconsistent with repeat testing warranted to determine whether the Babinski response is bilateral.
Okay, before we proceed, may differential diagnosis pa kayo? Wala na. Nalito ba kayo? Okay, sige. This is your first time presenting a neuro case for lectures? Hindi.
Yes, Doc.
Okay, sige. Balik ka dun sa primary impression. Actually, para sa mga susunod na lectures niyo for neuro, and when you rotate na eventually in neurology during your clerkship, after your physical examination, you do localization. No? Kasi what you did, although okay yung ano niyo, yung you presented very well in rule in rule out for each cases, but what you did was rule in, rule out for localization, actually. So what you're doing dito sa primary impression, sa INO, and then isolated CN6 palsy, those are actually how you localize. No, that's the thought process in localization. Okay, when you say localization, it is the anatomic location or where your lesion is that you're considering. And then when we talk about primary impression, that's the disease process causing whatever's wrong in that location. Okay. So for example, itong primary impression ninyo, this is actually localization. So yung foveal syndrome kasi that's already a specific portion in the pons. So that's your main localization. And then when you go to your next slide, ayan. So tama yung sinabi niyo that a foveal syndrome can present incompletely. So lahat ng syndromes kasi natin, they will not present perfectly na. Ito lahat ng components. Okay? So sige, next yung INO. Ayan, si INO. So habang nag-history pa lang kayo, you already have a patient with doubling of vision and difficulty moving left eye. Yun yung complaint niya. So ang susunod, aside from conjugate gaze palsy center na localization like in your uh, foveal syndrome, which is yung PPRF. When you say INO, you are already considering this as a possible localization, but you confirm it with your physical examination. So tama naman yung the way you ruled in and ruled it out, no? So impaired abduct na-rule out niya siya kasi it's walang impairment of abduction and walang yung mga nystagmus, ganyan. And then next, cranial nerve palsy. Ayan, that's also a localization na na iniisip niyo. Pero you ruled it out because it's usually a monocular problem. And then when you do localization and differential diagnosis, this is this is in general na ha, for neurology in general and sorry, in medicine in general. When you do your primary impression, you always base it on the history and PE of your patient. So wag niyo munang ilalagay kasi may MRI findings, no? So even if you are given a case protocol, always assume that when you give your primary impression to your preceptor or kung sino man yung and eventually in your practice, hindi lang sa mga boss niyo or mga teachers, primary impression is solely based on your history and PE. Okay, even with kasi pupunta ang pasyente sa inyo wala pang diagnostics. So you should be able to practice na meron kayong impression even without the MRI. And then next, you mentioned myasthenia gravis afterwards, no? Ayun. So after nung localization ninyo, so dapat ang sequence nito after nung PE is your neuroanatomic correlate kung saan yun nilagay lahat ng mga pertinent findings and then how you localized it and then yung primary localization nyo which is the paramedian pontine. And then for differential diagnosis, what are the different disease process that could cause this? A doubling of vision, impairment in extraocular muscles. So yes, correct, myasthenia gravis. Because common symptom yan ay diplopia. But also, what is myasthenia gravis? It's a neuromuscular junction, 'di ba, na dysfunction. And it has a very characteristic presentation, fatigability. Tama? Oo. Ano na ba kayo? Nag-Adams disease processes na ba kayo? Wala pa. Hindi pa kayo umabot sa myasthenia? Wala pa? Wala pa. Okay, sige. Basta eventually malalaman niyo ang myasthenia gravis, fatigability yan. So, the patient feels okay, strong, pero habang nagki-carry out siya ng certain activities, nagkakaroon ng mga weakness. Eventually, you learn more about myasthenia gravis. So that's one primary impression for disease process. And then what else can cause this? A stroke. Tama? That's our primary impression. And then a differential diagnosis also would be a diabetic neuropathy, cranial neuropathy. Kasi diabetes can impair the cranial nerves also. So, ganun yung naghalo kasi sa presentation ninyo, yung localization, the anatomic localization, and the etiologic. When we say anatomic, that's localization. When we say etiologic, what caused this anatomic disturbance, then that is your primary impression. We're talking about disease, differential diagnosis of disease. Okay? So, understood? Para sa susunod na presentations nyo, that's how you do it. Okay, sige. Next. Pero, at least I know that your group really studied bakit hindi ito yung localization for this case, no? Kasi napakita niyo siya. Sige, next. What's your next slide after that? So, okay na yan. So, yan, localization, pakita niyo lang. Sige, you'll discuss that na. You can go ahead with this slide.
Okay, so to continue for the diagnostics, A diagnostic was also provided in the case. So in the neuroimaging, so a T2 weighted and FAIR images demonstrated a small, well-defined hyperintense lesion measuring approximately 8 millimeters in diameter, localized in the left paramedian pontine reticular formation. Diffusion weighted imaging showed a restricted diffusion within the lesion, indicating acute ischemia or infarction. A gradient echo sequences revealed no evidence of microhemorrhages or susceptibility artifacts, and MRA was also performed to assess the blood vessels and circulation in the brainstem, and it also revealed a mild irregularity and narrowing of the left paramedian pontine artery, consistent with a small non-occlusive thrombus or embolus, causing partial vascular compromise. The adjacent vessels appeared normal, and there were no evident vascular anomalies or aneurysms. So next slide. So other than the tests that were provided by the case, these are the additional tests that we would like to offer. So another test would be the rationale for the previous test would be the MRI brain with DWI, which is most sensitive for detecting posterior circulation ischemia. The MRA, which actually visualizes the intracranial vessels non-invasively in posterior circulations, and it is used to actually detect stenosis, thrombosis, or emboli, and identify arterial dissection and evaluate the blood flow of the vertebrobasilar veins and arteries. Next is the CT scan. So it is to rule out any hemorrhagic strokes and detect any mass effects or increased intracranial pressure, and this is usually done to before initiating antithrombotic therapy like aspirin, anticoagulants, when we exclude the hemorrhagic strokes in the patient. And next is the 12-lead ECG. This screens the cardiac arrhythmias, which may lead to brain embolism. Since arrhythmias are also a major cause of embolic strokes, especially in atrial fibrillation. So next slide.
For the 2D echocardiography, the purpose is to assess for a cardioembolic source. The expected result would be normal heart chambers with no thrombus or valvular lesions. In our case, this test was not reported, so cardioembolic source cannot be completely excluded. However, if normal, it would further support a small vessel etiology for the infarct. Next, for the vascular risk assessment, which includes fasting blood sugar, HbA1c, and lipid profile, this is to intend to identify possible diabetes or dyslipidemia contributing to stroke risk. We would expect values showing elevated fast FBS and HbA1c, and also elevated LDL and low HDL due to arteriosclerotic risk. These results were not reported, but are important for identifying modifiable vascular factors such as hypertension, diabetes, or dyslipidemia. Next, for the swallowing screen, the goal is to detect dysphagia after stroke, which is common in brainstem involvement. The expected finding would be normal swallow if the relevant nuclei are not affected. In this patient, there was no report of swallowing difficulty, suggesting he is safe for oral intake. Next is daily ocular motility examinations to monitor recovery of gaze function. We expect to see impaired conjugate gaze to the affected side with gradual improvement over time. In this case, the patient had limited horizontal eye movement to the left, confirming ongoing left horizontal gaze palsy consistent with the left paramedian pontine lesion. Lastly, the NIH stroke scale used to assess stroke severity and functional impact. It would be expected to yield a low score given that the deficits are localized to the eye movement without limb weakness or speech impairment. Although the exact scores was not reported, the clinical findings suggest a mild brain stroke with minimal disability. Next slide.
So for the diagnosis, we will now correlate the patient's demographics, history, clinical manifestation, physical examinations, and imaging. Next slide, please. So based on the patient's demographic, being a 56-year-old male represents a significant risk factor for stroke as the risk notably increases after the age of 55, particularly among males. Additionally, the patient's history of hypertension further elevates his risk for both stroke and small vessel disease. Based on the sudden onset of symptoms lasting for 3 days, the type of stroke is most likely ischemic. Therefore, the combination of advanced age and chronic hypertension significantly increases his likelihood of developing stroke. As what was discussed earlier, the patient's clinical presentation of horizontal gaze palsy, especially to the left, without marked cortical manifestation, change in sensorium, no signs or evidence of hemorrhage by absence of vomiting and headache, additional cranial nerve involvement or sensory loss, along with intact convergence and vertical gaze, suggests that the lesion is focal. A lesion in the left PPRF would impair the signals sent to the left abducens nucleus, just what was discussed earlier. So this suggests that the lesion is in the left PPRF and abducens nucleus. So correlating with the imaging result, it confirmed that that there is a 8 millimeter hyperintense lesion in the left PPRF, and the DWI showed that there is a restricted diffusion within the lesion. The MRE results indicated that the paramedian pontine artery is the involved blood vessel, which further supports the localization of the ischemic event. So given the small 8 millimeter infarct located in the deep regions of the basilar artery territory, specifically the paramedian pontine artery, along with the patient's history of hypertension, that is consistent with a small vessel occlusion, commonly referred to as a lacunar infarct. Next slide, please. So for the final diagnosis, correlating the patient's demographics, clinical manifestation, and imaging, the final diagnosis is acute ischemic stroke, left paramedian pontine infarct involving the paramedian pontine reticular formation due to small vessel disease secondary to hypertension. Next slide, please.
So the management will focus on three main areas: the acute phase management, secondary prevention, and rehabilitation and long-term care. First, in the acute phase, the main goal is to stabilize the patient and prevent progression of the infarct. Since the patient presented 3 days after symptom onset, he is outside the 4.5-hour window for thrombolytic therapy, and imaging shows a small lacunar infarct, so thrombolysis and mechanical thrombectomy are not indicated. Thrombolytic therapy is effective only if given early and in large vessel occlusion. Giving it late increases bleeding risk without benefit. Then our next priority is blood pressure control. In non-thrombolized patients, we allow permissive hypertension up to 220 over 120 millimeters of mercury to maintain cerebral perfusion. If persistently elevated, we can gradually lower it by about 15% within the first 24 hours. His home medication, enalapril, can be continued and titrated as needed. Excessive BP reduction may decrease perfusion in the ischemic penumbra, worsening the infarct. Controlled lowering preserves blood flow while preserving complications. Next, we start antiplatelet therapy. Since no thrombolytic was given, we can initiate aspirin 160 to 325 milligrams daily within 24 to 48 hours, then maintain at 81 milligrams daily. Alternatively, a short course of dual antiplatelet therapy with aspirin and clopidogrel for 21 days may be considered in minor strokes. Early antiplatelet therapy reduces recurrent ischemic events and promotes vessel patency in non-cardioembolic stroke. And then supportive care is equally important, and this includes maintaining normal oxygenation, blood sugar, and temperature, ensuring adequate hydration, and closely monitoring for neurological deterioration. Systemic stability optimizes neuronal recovery and prevents secondary injury such as edema or hypoxia. Next slide. So once stabilized, we move on to secondary stroke prevention to avoid recurrence. For antithrombotic therapy, we continue aspirin long-term or switch to clopidogrel if aspirin intolerance develops. Since this is a non-cardioembolic stroke, anticoagulation is not indicated. Long-term antiplatelet therapy is the cornerstone of secondary prevention of lacunar strokes. For blood pressure control, the long-term goal is less than 130 over 80 millimeters of mercury. We continue his ACE inhibitor and we may consider adding a thiazide diuretic if further control is needed. The tight BP control reduces recurrent stroke risk and, protects small cerebral vessels from further damage.
Next is lipid management. We initiate high-intensity statin therapy, such as atorvastatin, 40 to 80 milligrams daily, with a target LDL of less than 70 milligrams per deciliter. Statins reduce plaque buildup and stabilize existing atheromas, preventing both large and small vessel events. We can also screen for diabetes using FBS or HbA1c, and if positive, we should maintain an HbA1c of less than 7%, since diabetes accelerates small vessel disease and worsens cerebrovascular risk. Lastly, we address lifestyle modifications, encouraging a low sodium Mediterranean style diet, regular aerobic exercise of at least 150 minutes per week, weight reduction to achieve BMI below 25, smoking cessation if the patient is smoking, and moderation of alcohol intake. Lifestyle modification reduces overall cardiovascular risk and improves long-term outcomes. Next slide, please. Okay, so next is the rehabilitation and long-term care. For stroke patients, they usually have to undergo rehabilitation since it is crucial, especially for this patient. It involves the PPRF that affects the patient's horizontal eye movements. We refer our patients to physical therapy for coordination and balance training, occupational therapy for motor and daily activities, and for this patient specifically, ocular rehabilitation for his diplopia and gaze palsy. This can also include prism lenses, eye patching, and ocular motor exercises under ophthalmology supervision. Early and multidisciplinary rehabilitation promotes neuroplasticity and compensatory adaptation, especially with PPRF involvement causing his gaze abnormalities. We also monitor for post-stroke depression or cognitive decline and provide appropriate psychological support or counseling. This improves motivation, adherence, and overall recovery quality. Finally, upon discharge, we emphasize stroke education, teaching the patient and family about the warning signs of stroke using the fast mnemonic: F for facial drooping, A arm weakness, S for speech difficulty, and T for time to call emergency services. We stress the importance of medication adherence, especially for antihypertensives, statins, and antiplatelets, and ensure follow-up for blood pressure and lipid monitoring. Lastly, we also connect the patient with rehab programs and stroke support groups to promote recovery and long-term adherence. Together, these interventions aim to prevent recurrence, maximize the patient's recovery, and improve their quality of life. Next slide.
So for the prognosis of the patient, factors which would indicate good prognosis would be a smaller infarct volume, lesions located in the rostral or lateral pons, and absence of disabling limb weakness at presentation. Those which suggest worse prognosis if it's bilateral or at the caudal pontine infarctions, a larger lesion size, progressive neurologic deterioration after onset, and involvement of multiple cranial nerve nuclei and motor tracts. In the patient's case, the lesion is small at 8 millimeters, confined to the PPRF and the abducens nucleus, which is why the patient had horizontal gaze palsy and diplopia. There is no involvement of facial nerve in the facial nerve pathway and minimal involvement of the corticospinal tract, which correlated to the absence of hemiparesis and dysarthria or difficulty in speaking, which indicates that the major motor and sensory pathways were spared. This suggests a minor stroke with an NIHSS scale of most likely less than 3, which correlates with an excellent functional recovery. So, hypertension is a major determinant of long-term stroke recurrence. Poor blood pressure control significantly increases the risk of subsequent lacunar and even large vessel cerebrovascular events. Therefore, aggressive management of hypertension is essential to maintain a favorable prognosis. As extensively discussed by my group mates, some of this include early dual antiplatelet therapy, statin initiation, and neuro-ophthalmologic rehabilitation. So the factors that will impact this patient's recovery would be based on the severity. Given that this is only a small lesion, there is a good prognosis for the patient. The etiology, hemorrhagic strokes are generally have a worse prognosis than ischemic strokes. And also the time to intervention, the treatment response, and the adherence to post-stroke treatment and rehabilitation regimens. So that ends our report for this case. Thank you for listening.
Okay. Thank you. May mga konting input lang, no? Comments. Can you go back to the diagnostics MRI slide? Before the slide before this, yan. Okay, so for diagnostic, picture A, this is what sequence ng MRI.
Yung T2 po to.
Picture A is DWI. So DWI is the sequence that you use to detect stroke. Si picture B, yung T2. So how do you know if it's T2? Di ba World War II? Have you heard of that, mnemonic? Yes. So World War II because water is white in T2. And why water? Because of the CSF. When we say water, it's the CSF. Look at the ventricles. This is the ventricle sa gitna. So that's white. So that you know that's T2. Ang important here is for any stroke considerations, it's the DWI and ABC that you look at. So si DW and ABC para silang partners na it's from the same image except magkaibang parang negative film kumbaga si ABC, may dropout. Ginagamit natin si T2 and si FLAIR to age the lesion. So in this case, you already have restricted diffusion or hyperintensity, yung pamumuti here on picture A. And when you see that already in picture B, you know that, and this is T2. So pag nakita mo yung lesion mo on T2 and FLAIR, then you already know that your lesion has been there for more than 4.5 hours already. So the hyperacute ones, kapag wala pa yung lesion na yan, then you are in the window for thrombolysis. But since your patient came in 3 days with symptoms na, then you really expect that you have this lesion on your T2 FLAIR. Ngayon, my question is, to the group who presented, bakit MRI yung pinagawa natin? Kasi you mentioned that you can do a CT scan, which could exclude the hemorrhage. But why an MRI?
Doc, based sa mga cases na binasa ko na similar to this, mostly MRI since it's extremely sensitive ba sa mga acute ischemia daw, Doc. And yun po parating ino-order. And other than that, yung CT scan, though very fast po naman siya and less expensive, there's lower sensitivity in detecting early changes, ischemic changes po, particularly sa mga brainstem. Yun po yung sinasabi.
Okay, so yes, that's true, no? So yung the reason why this patient, why we did an MRI in this patient is because of the location. Remember, you are already considering that this is a posterior circulation stroke. Diba? Yung initial localization nyo ay pons, no? So when you're considering a pontine lesion, any brainstem lesion, and you're considering a small infarct, small-sized infarct, lacunar or mga maliliit lang, then the sensitivity of CT scan is not so good. Hindi niya mapapakita yun sa'yo. No, that's why you do an MRI, especially for posterior circulation stroke, kasi dun mo lang siya makikita. But if you are considering an anterior circulation, for example, a corona radiata, di ba anterior yan, supratentorial naman yan, o can it be seen on CT scan on an acute stroke? Kapag maliit siya, hindi mo rin siya makikita. So if you're considering if your patient comes in with very mild symptoms and you want to really document it, then you proceed with MRI. So why do we do a CT scan? Why do we want to exclude hemorrhage? Kasi lagi natin yung sinasabi, you also presented it. When does it become useful?
Yung CT scan po, Doc, mostly useful
First
siya
line. Go, Arnel.
Mostly useful siya in in detecting mga mass effects or like mga increased intracranial pressure. And this is as mentioned earlier, na it is to rule out hemorrhagic stroke. Since when it comes to mga ischemia, we usually ini-initiate natin yung mga thrombotic therapy sa patient. So it is to rule out na rin yung mas palala ng case natin sa patient.
Okay, someone also tried to speak a while ago. Sino siya?
Hi, Doc. If needed po siya ASAP, we're gonna do CT scan po. If
When
super
we say as soon as possible, ano yung urgency doon?
If sa patient natin since stroke po, and if may thrombolytic or symptoms na po na show.
Okay, sige. The reason you said it na thrombolytic. The reason why we do a CT scan is because it's fast and it excludes hemorrhage. For your case, no, for any patient na iniisipan nyo na ischemic stroke, when they come in within the golden period, 3 to 4.5 hours of symptoms, you do a CT scan to exclude hemorrhage. Yun yung sinasabi, yun yung nasa slide nyo. The benefit of that is you are in a race against time when you thrombolize, diba? When you thrombolize, you give the RTPA. It's a very exciting, na setup na magbibigay kayo ng thrombolytic agent. It's a strong clot buster. You know, patutunawin talaga niya yung clot. But so in order for you to give it as soon as possible, you need a really fast diagnostics, no? And then an MRI kasi will take you 45 minutes to finish. A CT scan will only take, 5 minutes. Pasok lang siya, tas lalabas na siya agad. So when you want to thrombolize a patient, you just want to exclude a hemorrhage para mabigay mo yung gamot na yon. So for example, let's use this case. Your patient came in, nagdidiplopia siya, but the patient came in 2 hours prior to consult. Do you expect to see that small stroke, small size na stroke, tapos 2 hours pa lang in a CT scan? Yes or no? Will you see it? No. Diba? So hindi mo siya makikita sa CT scan. So pag, for example, this patient came into the ER, pina-CT ko siya, pinasok natin siya sa CT. negative ang CT scan, does that mean that the patient has no stroke?
No po, Doc.
No, you are still considering a stroke. It just so happens that the diagnostics that you did or you requested for didn't show it. Will you still give the thrombolysis? Will you still give RTPA in this patient?
Yes po, Doc.
Yes, because the only info that you need for you to not give it or to not proceed with it is that you have a hemorrhage in the brain. Okay? So, baka may mga instances kasi na, wala namang stroke na nakita sa CT scan. Bakit nag-treat? Bakit nagbigay ng IV or thrombolysis? So, yun lang yung gusto natin gawin. Yun lang yung gusto nating i-rule out just so we can give the medication. So, for this case, the reason also why MRI na yung pinagawa natin kasi wala naman na tayong hinahabol na oras. 'Di ba? Hindi na tayo naghahabol kasi 3 days na siya. So you can do an imaging that is cost effective. Yung hindi ka nauulit. Pag 3 days after dumating yung patient at CT scan pinagawa mo, baka wala ka pa rin makita lalo na kung maliit. So just do an MRI to be sure. And then dun sa protocol na binigay sa inyo, it really mentioned narrowing of the left paramedian pontine artery? Or is it
Yun po nakalagay sa case, narrowing of the PPRF.
Okay, sige. So, for your information, yung basilar artery yung malilit lang talaga ang blood vessels natin. The paramedian pontine artery is a very, very small branch. No? We usually don't see it on MRA. Tapos these are like small branches, mga grass na maliliit that comes out from the basilar artery. So probably, I think this is a mild irregularity and narrowing of the basilar artery and not the left paramedian pontine artery kasi it's really rare to see it. It's so small. Sige, next slide. Okay, sige. So yung mga diagnostics, nasabi niyo naman extensively. So siguro just to summarize or wrap this up, when you have a patient coming in with a symptom of stroke, you have to answer like 4 questions, no? So, or 5. Yeah, 5. So, is there a lesion? Meron ba talagang problema yung patient? So, next is when did the lesion happen? So, when you say when, you are trying to establish the ictus. No, kasi para alam niyo kung magta-thrombolyze ba kayo or hindi. Next question is where is the lesion? What is your anatomic localization? And then next is what is the lesion? Is this really a stroke or is this a stroke mimicker? Is it hypoglycemia? Is it a tumor? Is it a mass? Or is it really a vascular pathology? And next is why is there a lesion? So when you ask the question why is there a lesion, you are talking about the risk factors of your patient. So it's good that you mentioned dun sa final impression ninyo that the etiologic diagnosis, this is likely secondary to a small vessel disease due to the uncontrolled or due to the long-standing hypertension of your patient. So always check for other comorbidities. So yung question of blood thinners, when do you give an antiplatelet versus anticoagulant? For this case, why did you proceed with aspirin? Why not warfarin? Why not apixaban, edoxaban? you always go back to the pathophysiology of your stroke, diba? When we're talking about stroke, ano yung two most common mechanisms of your stroke? You have what?
Thrombus and emboli po.
Thrombosis and embolus, no? So when we say thrombosis, think of, basta pag narinig niyo yung thrombosis na word, isipin niyo na agad blood vessel ang involved. There's an inherent problem in your blood vessel. So think of your blood vessels as pipes. No, kapag may mga atherosclerosis yan, nangangalawang na yan. So they are more prone to form plaques, and that plaque can also have some because of the plaque, naging turbulent yung flow, 'di ba? Nagkakaroon ng turbulence, they are also more prone to form a clot. Okay, naintindihan 'yon? Okay. And then the next is embolism. So under embolism, you have two main. You have a thromboembolism and a cardioembolism. What do we mean by thromboembolism? Again, sabi ko sa inyo, kapag narinig niyo yung thrombosis, think vessel. So when you say thromboembolism, kasi when you say embolus, 'di ba? There is a clot that is being dislodged somewhere proximal to another location more distally. 'Di ba? Unlike thrombosis, the problem is just within that location. Okay? So when you say thromboembolism, pag combine niyo lang, thrombo, vessel, and then embolism, something's throwing. So when you say thromboembolism, the clot is coming from within a vessel, a larger vessel, and then going more distally into the smaller, to either a similar large vessel or a smaller blood vessel. Naintindihan? Okay. As compared to cardioembolism, you have cardioembolism, where is the source of your embolus?
Sa heart
From the
po.
heart chambers po.
The heart chambers, good. So you have atrial fibrillation, mechanical valves, valvular heart disease, okay? Sige, so yun yung iisipin nyo na broad categories para hindi kayo mahirapan when you dissect a vascular case. Kasi there are other mechanisms and there are other disease or etiologic processes. Pero in your level, ito yung gusto kong maintindihan nyo and why we give certain medications. So you have thrombosis, thromboembolism, and then cardioembolism, di ba? So pag sinabi nating thrombosis, pangangalawang, think atherosclerosis, no? Deposition of your mga lipids, mga cholesterols, yung blood sugar na uncontrolled, yan yung mga titignan nyo. So when you have a patient with those risk factors, thrombotic or thromboembolism, kapag vessel ang involved, think antiplatelet. Okay? Kapag cardiac ang involved, think anticoagulants. Kapag cardioembolism, think anticoagulant. Okay. So for your patient, what is your risk factors? Diba hypertension? And you have a small vessel disease secondary to hypertension. So you are invoking the vessels. So what treatment regimen? Antiplatelet or anticoagulant?
Antiplatelet.
Antiplatelet. Good. So, as compared to a patient, for example, let's say this patient has an wag namang atrial fibrillation. That's a very obvious answer. That's going to be cardioembolism. So, for example, your patient, stroke in the young, let's say si Regina, wag naman sana, nagkaroon ng stroke. No? Ilang taon ka na, Regina?
25, Doc.
Let's say 25-year-old si Regina nagkaroon ng stroke. Hindi siya atrial fibrillation, pero sasabihin ni Regina sa atin na lagi siya nagkakaroon ng throat infection, lalo na nung bata siya. So anong isipin niyo pag may recurrent throat infection?
Strep. RHD po, Doc.
RHD. So may strep infection and then eventually nag-RHD. And you know that in RHD, ano yung complication ng rheumatic heart disease? You have
Mitral stenosis.
mitral stenosis, then you have a valvular problem. Embolic. So what do you give? Anticoagulant or antiplatelet for Regina?
Anticoag po.
Anticoagulant. Good. And then for anticoagulation, you have different anticoagulants, di ba? You have warfarin, That's a vitamin K antagonist. Next is NOACs. Okay. Si NOACs, marami yung NOACs. Tama ba? Third year na kayo, di ba? So, tapos na kayo sa pharma? Yes? So, si NOACs, marami yung NOACs. Di ba you have factor 10A? What are the factor 10A NOACs that you know? It's XA.
Apixaban, Doc.
Apixaban, edoxaban, rivaroxaban, no? Then what is a direct thrombin inhibitor na NOAC? Okay, so for
Heparin, Doc.
that's antithrombin 3. But for direct thrombin na inhibitor,
Dabigatran.
dabigatran. Okay, so think edoxaban, apixaban, you have XA. So those are factor 10A. When you have the bigatran, you have DNT, right? When you spell it. So that's direct thrombin inhibitor. And then for heparin, you have antithrombin 3, no? Na mechanism. So you have 3 anticoagulants possible. Okay? Sige. Let's say si Regina. Si Regina, na nag-RHD, na nag-stroke, anong ibibigay natin? Warfarin, NOAC, or heparin?
Warfarin, Doc.
Warfarin, why?
Because it's a valvular defect po.
Okay, it's a valvular defect. How many V's are there in valvular? Na word. Two. Have 2V. Pag pinagdikit mo yung dalawang V na yon, anong letter yan? So that's warfarin, right? So that's how you remember na kapag valvular ang patient mo na nag-stroke, you give warfarin. Useless ang NOACs dyan. So you will not protect your patient from having another stroke if you give NOACs. In Regina's case na may RHD. Okay? So for NOACs, you give it for non-valvular cardioembolic. So kapag may atrial fibrillation na wala namang valve problem. What if valvular AF? Irregular yung heartbeat niya. Si Regina parang nagsiskip beats palagi, no? So you have ang daming irregular heartbeats pero RHD si Regina. Do you still give warfarin or NOACs? Warfarin. Mangingibabaw yung valvular heart problem niya rather than the atrial fibrillation. So any valve problem, that's already warfarin, okay? And then you use heparin means for bridging lang if you want, but it's not the standard na management, okay? So yun yung mga that's how you decide on what to give your patient. And minsan mahirap talaga sabihin na mukhang cardioembolic ganyan. But always depend on your history and physical examination. That's why I always tell my students, especially you guys when you rotate na, ugaliin nyo to always check the pulses of your patients and yung skin discoloration. Kasi that will give you an idea how vast or how progressive is the atherosclerosis na in the body. What if nag-stroke yung patient mo pero di naman pala siya hypertensive tapos yung pulses niya are good, wala siyang mga other atherosclerotic factors, then mag-iisip ka, baka hindi ito yung usual na atherosclerosis na mechanism na thrombotic. Then look for other mechanisms. No? So yun yung naintindihan niyo how to do it, how to dissect a vascular case. Okay, but this is for secondary stroke prevention. Okay, if they come beyond the golden period time. So when we talk about golden hour naman, someone mentioned a while ago NIHSS na hindi natin masabi dito sa patient na to. Actually, you can grade the NIHSS score of this patient kasi you only have one deficit, and that's like gaze palsy. So that's an NIHSS 1. So NIHSS kasi it's that 0 to 42. 0 is normal. Kayong lahat, wala kayong deficits. 42 is the most severe. And NIHSS is treatment altering. So for your patient, actually you started aspirin 163.25. That's okay. But you also said short-term dual antiplatelet. for 21 days in minor stroke. This is the CHANCE trial, CHANCE protocol. This recommendation is based on one trial, the CHANCE called the CHANCE trial. So how do you classify minor stroke, diba? You always go back to your patient. That's why you do your NIHSS. Is this patient eligible for a dual antiplatelet therapy? Because in patients with NIHSS 4 and below, or if you have a TIA score na ABCD 4 and above, high-risk TIA and minor stroke, then eligible sila for dual antiplatelet. So you can actually place your patient on dual antiplatelet for this case. Okay, and so that's for the secondary stroke prevention and NIHSS. For RTPA, for thrombolysis, you always do your NIHSS. Bakit? Treatment altering siya. Kapag sobrang laki, kapag sobrang severe na NIHSS score mo, you do not give it because pwedeng mag-convert yung stroke mo into a hemorrhage. So, before part of your readings na lang, familiarize yourselves with how to do the NIHSS. How to score your stroke patients. Okay? Sige. Anything else? Wala na. So lahat naman ng secondary stroke and prognosis that you mentioned are that's correct. Sige. Do you have any questions or clarifications? We can end early. Okay. Kung wala, naintindihan niyo naman yung case. Yes, and how to do it, ha? Always after the PE, that's localization, yung pertinent anatomic, and then different primary impression based on etiologic diagnosis na. For your final, can you just show me your final slide, final impression? Ayan. So, acute CVD infarct left paramedian pontine artery, oo, pwede na yan, involving the PPRF due to small vessel disease secondary to hypertension. So, you already have, tawag dito, you already have an etiologic diagnosis, that's the stroke. Then you have a localization, that's the anatomic area. You also have, ang kulang lang dito is blood supply. You always put blood supply in your stroke diagnosis. And then good that you included the mechanism. So small vessel disease. And then what is the risk factor? That's good. One more missing, NIHSS score. NIHSS. So yun, this is a good slide on how to do it. So when you go into clerkship, tapos nag-rotate kayo sa neuro, this is how you phrase a stroke diagnosis. Just add the NIHSS and the blood supply. Okay? Sige. No questions? Thank you. So we'll end early.
Thank you po, Doc.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you po, Doc.